A desperate call for help. Jonah trudged home from school, each step a reminder of the burdens he carried. The sky was a slate grey, clouds looming overhead, and he felt their heaviness in his small frame. His backpack sagged against his back, filled with textbooks and the weight of unspoken worries. Today had been particularly tough, with the taunts of classmates echoing in his mind, but those concerns paled in comparison to the pressing thought of his mother, who had been unwell for days. The streets of Riverside Grove were all too familiar, yet they felt foreign today, as if the air had thickened with something ominous. Crumbling buildings lined the street, their graffiti-covered walls whispering stories of hardship and resilience. The distant sirens of emergency vehicles became an unsettling soundtrack to his thoughts, and the chatter of those loitering on street corners barely registered. What weighed most heavily on Jonah's mind was the plastic bag in his hand, containing a few groceries he had managed to buy after school, apples and a loaf of bread. He had been proud of himself for picking those items, knowing they would bring a smile to his mother's tired face. But as he walked, the anticipation of that smile faded, replaced by a growing anxiety about her condition. His sneakers scuffed the cracked pavement as he approached the rusty door of their apartment building, the one they had called home for as long as he could remember. He let out a small sigh, his heart heavy. The door was familiar, yet today it seemed more ominous than usual. Jonah hesitated, noticing that the door stood slightly ajar, a detail that sent a cold wave of fear through him. His mother was always careful about locking the door, especially in their neighborhood, where danger seemed to lurk at every corner. Jonah stood frozen for a moment, his heartbeat quickening as he processed the scene before him. Something was wrong. With trembling fingers, he pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, calling out, "Mom?" His voice cracked, the sound echoing in the silence of their small apartment. The usual warmth of home was absent. The kitchen, typically bustling with the comforting sounds of his mother's movements, was eerily quiet. As he stepped further into the dimly lit space, his heart sank at the sight of his mother lying on the kitchen floor, motionless. "Mom!" he shouted, panic rising in his throat. He dropped the bag, apples rolling away, forgotten in the face of his desperate need to reach her. Kneeling beside her, he felt the coldness of her skin beneath his fingers. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, and her breathing was shallow and uneven. Jonah's hands shook as he gently shook her shoulder. "Mom, wake up! Please wake up!" Tears threatened to spill from his eyes, but he forced them back, fighting against the overwhelming fear that threatened to consume him. Then he smelled it, a burnt odor mixed with steam rising from the stove. Jonah's heart raced as he turned to see a pot of soup boiling over, spilling across the burner. Without thinking, he jumped to his feet and rushed to the stove, turning off the heat with shaky hands. The last thing they needed was a fire to add to this chaos. When he turned back to his mother, she was still lying there, unconscious. He couldn't just stand by. He had to do something. Desperation clawed at him as he searched the kitchen for her cell phone. Where was it? Tossing aside old bills and dish towels, he rummaged through the clutter on the counter until he remembered her phone was charging in their bedroom. With adrenaline surging through him, Jonah sprinted to the small bedroom they shared. He grabbed the phone, fumbling as he dialed 911, his hands trembling with fear. He paced the small space as he held the phone to his ear, his heart pounding with each ring that echoed in the quiet apartment. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, a stark contrast to the chaos enveloping Jonah. "It's my mom," he stammered, his words spilling out in a frantic rush. "She's unconscious, she's pregnant, and I don't know what to do. Please, I need help." There was a brief pause, and Jonah could hear the operator typing on her keyboard. "What's your location, sweetie?" Her tone remained detached, as if reading from a script, while panic swirled in Jonah's chest. 103 Willow Street, apartment 2A, he cried, his voice rising with desperation. "Please hurry." Another pause stretched on, longer this time, and Jonah's heart sank as he heard the operator's next words. "You said 103 Willow Street. That's in the Southside District, right?" "Yes, yes! Please, we need help," Jonah nodded frantically, though she couldn't see him. The operator sighed audibly, a sound that made Jonah's stomach twist. "Honey, I'm going to be honest with you," she said, her tone now colder, more dismissive. "Calls from that area usually take a while to get to. Our units are spread pretty thin, and we prioritize the most urgent cases." Jonah felt as though he had been punched in the gut. How could this not be urgent? His mom wasn't breathing right, and she was pregnant. "But this is urgent," he cried, his voice trembling with fear. "She's not breathing right. Please, I need someone to come now." Another silence fell, this one heavy and suffocating. When the operator finally spoke again, her tone was sharp. "We'll get someone there when we can. Just hold on." The line went dead. Jonah stared at the phone in disbelief, his hands trembling as he slowly lowered it from his ear. How could she hang up? How could they leave his mom like this? Tears stung the corners of his eyes, but he forced them back. He didn't have time to cry. He had to do something. His mother's life depended on it. Taking a deep breath, Jonah knelt beside his mother again, gently placing his hand on her forehead. Her skin was cold to the touch, her breathing still faint and uneven. Panic surged through him, but he tried to remember what he had learned in school about first aid. "Okay, think, Jonah," he muttered to himself, his heart racing. He had seen demonstrations of CPR, but the thought of doing it on his mom filled him with dread. Yet he couldn't just sit there. He had to try. His mother needed him now more than ever. Summoning all his courage, he began the motions, placing his hands on her chest and pushing down rhythmically. "Come on, Mom," he whispered, desperation lacing his voice. "You can do this. Please wake up." As he worked, Jonah felt the weight of his surroundings pressing down on him, the peeling paint on the walls, the broken furniture, and the suffocating silence that enveloped the room. But he pushed those thoughts away, focusing solely on his mother. With each compression, he willed her to breathe, to fight, to come back to him. He could feel his heart racing, the fear threatening to drown him as he continued, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Just when he felt his strength waning, a noise echoed in the distance, a faint sound that grew louder. Was it sirens? Hope surged within him, fueling his determination to keep going. As the sound grew closer, Jonah's mind drifted momentarily, remembering the stories his mother had told him about their community, how they had each other's backs, how neighbors would come together in times of need. But today, that sense of community felt far away, swallowed by the indifference he had just experienced. Still, as he leaned over his mother, he realized he wasn't alone. He was fighting for her life, and he was not going to give up. "I love you, Mom," he said between breaths, his voice trembling but resolute. "Please come back. I need you." In that moment of fear and desperation, Jonah tapped into something deep within himself. It was a fierce determination, a bond of love that transcended the limitations of age or experience. He refused to let go, refused to believe that their story would end here. With every beat of his heart, he pushed forward, a small boy in a world that felt impossibly large, yet driven by a love that was boundless. The sound of sirens finally drew closer, the distant wail becoming a lifeline. Jonah held on to that hope, feeling it pulsing through him, reminding him that even in the darkest moments, there was still a chance. He wouldn't stop fighting for his mother, and he wouldn't stop believing in the power of love and resilience. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for now, he was determined to hold on to the light, no matter how faint it seemed.